All right, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to everybody in the UK. Happy Friday afternoon and evening to everyone in China. And hello to everyone in between. Welcome to this, our final webinar in the CBBC SME webinar week. We'll get going quite quickly. Just a little bit of background about CBBC. The China Britain Business Council is the leading organisation helping UK companies grow and develop their business with China. CBBC supports British companies of all sizes and at every stage of market entry with practical in-market assistance, services, industry initiatives, as well as a membership program offering access, seminars and significant networking. CBBC works closely with UKTI and the FCO and has strategic partnership with the British Chamber of Commerce in Beijing, providing corporate members with reciprocal membership. Our business-led board and professional team have extensive first-hand experience of doing business in China, and through 60 years of engagement this year, CBBC has built up exceptional connections with government and business across China. CBBC services are delivered across a network of 10 offices in the UK and 13 strategic locations across China. CBBC helps companies to network and learn from China-savvy multinationals and SMEs to understand the intricacies of doing business in China and to develop sound strategies for expanding in the fast-changing and dynamic marketplace that is modern China. So just a little bit of background on CBBC. On the back of the Prime Minister's visit to China a couple of weeks ago, we have launched a new platform for SMEs. We call it Opportunity to Action. I recommend that all of you go and have a look at our website. There you will find a CBBC e-commerce guide. You'll also find the Royal Mail Guide to Targeting the Chinese Consumer. Lots and lots, thousands of business opportunities and practical fact sheets and SME case studies. So as I said, this series of webinars has really been born out of the visit to China by the Prime Minister, and also our desire to assist a whole new wave of companies going to China. All right, so this week what we have done is... Sometimes lost, yeah. What we have done is, this is the fifth in a series of 5. So on Monday we had Finding an Agent Distributor, Tuesday, selling online, Wednesday, avoiding common scams. Yesterday was marketing your products in China, and today we're talking about the CCC mark in China. We are ably supported, and thank you very much for the consistent support this week of the EU SME Centre in China. The EU SME Centre in Beijing is a project, as it says here, funded by the European Union to assist SMEs to export to China and establish and develop market and develop and maintain commercial activities in the Chinese market. Free confidential information and advice and practical support and services. They do lots and lots of stuff, lots of fantastic reports on their website, also a very good diagnostic tool where you can kind of check out your readiness for China, and a huge number of sector experts. So I would absolutely recommend logging on and having a look at what they do themselves. And thank you very much to the EU SME Centre for their support this week. All right. So just to show you how it all works, if you want to ask a question, please drop it into the little part that I'm highlighting right now. We're a little bit time constrained today, so we may not get to everybody's questions due to other commitments. We'll have to move quite quickly, but we will definitely pass on any questions that you may have. Right, if I could please ask everybody to raise their hand. If I could just ask you to raise your hand just on the part that I'm clicking right now. That will just enable me to make sure that you can all hear. And it sounds like you absolutely can. Brilliant. Okay. Well, I don't want to waste any more time, so I will just introduce our speaker today. Martina has over 15 years professional industry and consulting experience in Europe and China across many different industry sectors. She contributed to a number of EU-China cooperation projects with AQSIQ, CNCA, and various European organizations and governments on new energy vehicle standards and conformity, environmental standards, ICT, and trade secrecy-related issues. She's currently heading up the Standards and Conformity Assessment team in the EU SME Centre. Martina advises European SMEs on their market access to China. So we are extremely happy to have Martina. I think there are very few people with her expertise and knowledge to assist on this topic. So as we begin, I'm just going to hand over to Martina and do that scary moment where I check that the person is still out there in Beijing. Martina, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks very much for the nice introduction.
Not at all. Me? We can hear you loud and clear. We're on.
Not at all.
We can hear you loud and clear. Loud and clear.
Okay. So it's not the other, how to say, it's the other way around today, but I think I'm starting today. Okay, good morning everybody in Europe, and good afternoon for those who are listening in China. This is Martina Guest speaking from Beijing, from the EU SME Center. And today's webinar is about market access in China, the China Compulsory Certification. So you will get an overview. And of course, we will introduce how to apply for the CCC mark. So next slide, please. Market access in China is restricted for most goods. One or several pre-market approval schemes are applying. Next slide, please. So one, for example, is the approbation of medical devices by the China Food and Drug Administration. Another one we will learn about today is the China Compulsory Certification Scheme. According to a catalogue published by the CNCA, we will learn about what this organization is about later, which is based on compulsory national standards. And then there are a couple of other licensing schemes controlled by various ministries, mainly based on technical regulations, national standards, and trade sector standards. So for many categories of mechanical and electrical goods, import licenses are required. There are also some goods, like for example electronic appliances, which in addition require marks and labels on a self-declaration basis, which is, for example, the China Compulsory Energy Label and the China ROHS Declaration for Electronic Products. So currently, could you swap to the next slide, please? It's the China pre-market and post-control one. So in Europe, for the pre-market assessment, it is the economic operator, like producers and manufacturers, who are responsible. Products have to fulfill essential requirements, like, for example, the CE marking, maybe everybody knows, which is required for many products, stating that the product is assessed before being placed on the market. And it has to meet, of course, EU safety, health, and environmental protection requirements. In China, in contrary, it's the joint responsibility of government and economic operators. So I already said there are compulsory licenses for many product categories, there are labeling requirements, and the CCC is one of the main schemes. Government entities, we will learn about them in a couple of minutes, are the AQ, SIQ, or the SIC, and other ministries. In terms of post-market control in Europe, the post-market control is done by the member states and consists basically to check the compliance with essential requirements by market surveillance authorities. In China, the post-market control is the sole responsibility of provinces and municipalities. And this means to be compliant with compulsory standards. This requires coordination on a national level by the authorities like AQ, SIQ, and SIC. So what you will find is, for example, that testing is done in approved testing labs appointed by the government. Next slide, please. So the path to the China market is basically is demanded by rules which are set by Chinese standards, which may or may not be aligned with respective international or globally accepted standards. So in practice, this means few international certificates are accepted and conformity is compulsory. Thus, the rules are enforced by certification, licensing, labeling, and similar requirements. The instructions defining this process, and they add another layer of rules below standards. The rules are implemented by government entrusted entities which might be part of the ministries themselves or appointed bodies. So the complexity of the system is overwhelming because each ministry has its own standards and licensing schemes. On top of this are the provinces, they may apply additional requirements. The CCC mark is a common mandatory certificate for many products listed in a catalogue, which I will introduce later. And as mentioned, the products not in the CCC product catalog may need to adhere to other corresponding regulations. So the key for technical market access is to work according to government instructions. Therefore, we think that the path to the China market includes questions you will come across dealing with what are the legal requirements, does my product require certification, mandatory marking, registration, or all of them? Where do I find the technical requirements? Where do I have to do the conformity assessment? And probably also which test methods will be used. So the next slide or the next part of the presentation will give you an overview basically of the China Compulsory Certification. Next slide, please. So the China Compulsory Certificate, also known as CCC or CCC certificate, is implemented since 2003, and it is established to comply with WTO and technical barriers to trade requirements. So if a product is falling under the catalog, or we will learn about in a minute, the certificate is compulsory for imported and domestic products. This really means that only products with this CCC certification are allowed to be imported into China, sold in China, or used in China. Therefore, manufacturers and importers planning to enter the Chinese market, it is essential to understand the CC requirements and processes to ensure that all products have the proper certification and markings. So you probably now are curious about the different laws, regulation, and rules. Next slide, please. So what you can see on the bottom, like the laws, they are made by the State Council and the AQSIQ, which is, I hope I can get it together, the General Administration of Quality, Supervision, Inspection, and Quarantine. So China's compulsory product certification system is established on the basis of the Product Quality Law of the People's Republic of China, the law of the People's Republic of China, Import and Export Commodity Inspection, and the Standardization Law. In the middle, you see the regulations. They are, again, made by AQSIQ and CNCA, which belongs to AQSIQ, which is another body. It's the China National Certification and Accreditation Administration. So this has been set up in 2001, where the CNCA is basically responsible for the regulations and the rules. So any administrative specification, for example, in terms of the certification mark, is done by CNCA. What does this mean? This means that the CNCA is responsible for the certification implementation rules of the products listed in the catalog, and you'll find more than 70 such implementation rules stipulating the scope of the certification of the relevant products. So, for example, you will find the principles for the classification of product units, or the standards against which the certification is done with. You find also the requirements for samples, or, for example, the list for key parts. But also other rules like the fees, for example. Next slide, please. In terms of standards, you will find 4 different levels. So there are 4 different levels of standards based on the structure of this hierarchical pyramid, with national standards on the top and enterprise standards on the bottom. So The national standards, which are also referred to as GB, the Guobiao, are the critical components of the Chinese standardization system. Around 15% of the national standards are compulsory. So what you can see in the slide, it's the more than 3,000 standards are compulsory. Those standards, so the Chinese national standards, are maintained by the Standardization Administration of China, the SAC, which also provides free online standards inquiry services. The mandatory standards are enforced by laws for the protection of human health, personal property and safety. Here in the pyramid you also see other standards like professional standards. They are applying when no national standard exists, which can be either voluntary or compulsory. You also find local standards. They apply when no national standards and professional standards exists, and set up the requirements in a specific sector area. You also find enterprise standards. They are never mandatory, but they are established by individual enterprises, for example, for quality control. Next slide, please. The implementation now of all this is also done by, a trinity, which consists of the accreditation bodies, the certification bodies, and the labs. The accreditation bodies, for example, you can find, or you will find here, CNCA, I already mentioned. So the accreditation bodies, they do basically the accreditation of the different certification bodies. They are responsible for lab recognition, but they also publish regulations and update them, and they are also responsible for the CCC label issuance and the mark permissions. What concerns the certification bodies, you find 13 different certification bodies which are accredited by CNCA to issue the CCC certificate by product category. So CQC is the biggest renowned one. I'm later referring to this when I introduce the CCC process. And on the top of this pyramid you find the labs. So in China there are about 152 recognized labs to conduct testing by product category, by manufacturer or factory location. And all this, I mentioned, it's regulated by CNCA. Next slide, please. I already mentioned there is this famous CCC catalog. So everything you can find in this catalog is basically requires a CCC certificate. So the CCC mark applies to a broad range of consumer goods, electronic products and industrial products. The products that are listed in this catalog we will find now on the three slides. So this list is constantly expanding and it currently contains 19 broad categories and 148 product categories. So here on the first slide of the CCC catalog you see, for example, in the first category electrical wires, but you also find category 7 household and similar electrical appliances. Next slide, please. On the second slide of the catalog you will find like audio and video apparatus. You will find, but you also find motor vehicle tires or agricultural machinery. Next slide, please. Since May 2013, for those who are familiar with CCC, the catalog has changed a little bit. Actually, the medical devices have been removed from the catalog. So I think before it was 23 categories and 150 more subcategories. So this has changed a bit. Next slide, please. So how to apply for the CCC mark? We put together for you a process. So maybe the first one. Next slide. When does the mark apply? So you probably would like to export to China, and your first steps basically consist of the following points. One idea would be, for example, to search the HS code, the harmonized system code in the Chinese customs handbook. You maybe have at hand or not. In case you don't have it, there is this market access database allowing European companies to search tariff and import requirements for China, and it's including this database, the CCC, but also using HS code. So here you will find the link. I already mentioned that the CCC system is based on GB standards, and if you find then to the HS code the respective GB standards, then which are mandatory to your product, and it's a good indication that your product will require the CCC mark. In some cases, other marks are required depending on the product category. Next slide, please. So, how to apply for CCC? We have put together a step-by-step overview or procedure, however you call it. So, after the submission of numerous documents for application, you need to turn in your product sample to the corresponding certification organization or laboratory. Should the product positively pass the testing procedures, the certification organization will come to your factory to do the initial factory inspection before the certificate issuance. This organization will assess whether the manufacturing process meets the necessary requirements or not. To pass this inspection is the prerequisite for you to obtain the certificate. After obtaining the certification, follow-up inspections will be carried out every 12 to 18 months in order to maintain the mark. Next slide, please. And now we go into the detail. This was just, how to say, an overview. So it is essential, and essential, I mean it in capital letters, that all supporting documentation matches the application. Attention should be paid on providing consistent information with regards to labels and associated documents such as company name, product description, or model number. This is usually the most common delay in the application process. If CQC, one of the bodies I mentioned before, finds that the application is consistent, they will proceed by issuing a certification charge notice and a sampling notice together with your application number. Also, of course, an invoice will indicate the applied certification fees, and after payment, CQC will assign the task of testing to one of its affiliated laboratories. It is important to mention that all of these CCC testing laboratories are in China. After receiving the sample notice, the applicant needs to deliver the samples to the testing laboratory according to the request. So generally, 2 samples are required to be sent to China. However, this may vary according to the product. The test sample needs to be accompanied by the proper information, which can cause some confusion. Therefore, it may be a good idea to seek advice, for example, from your freight forwarder. Upon the arrival in China, the freight forwarder is required to pick up the test sample and deliver it to the testing laboratory. Next slide, please. The next step basically in the process is sample or part submission and testing. So testing takes place in a laboratory in China. I already mentioned this, and another very cumbersome point is that Chinese authorities do not recognize any tests except those conducted in Chinese test labs for the purpose of certification. the testing laboratory in China will be assigned to the applicant by the certification authority, but it's also possible to name a preferred laboratory in China. All test reports are issued in Chinese. As mentioned before, Chinese standards correspond largely to European ECE and other IEC international standards, but be sensitive to frequently occurring Chinese deviations. So when both the evaluation and the testing is completed, the laboratory will submit a test report to CQC for review and approval. Next slide, please. Now, the interesting part of the factory inspection is the next step in the process. So the initial factory inspection is performed by Chinese inspectors. They will come to one, or depending on how it is required, to a number of locations that needs to be certified. Besides this initial factory inspection, there are others like follow-up inspections, extension inspections, or revalidation of the suspended certificate inspections. So from a Chinese point of view, the purpose of this audit or the inspection is to confirm that the facility who manufactures is up to Chinese standards and quality management and follows the relevant CCC regulations. So I already mentioned this initial inspection is carried out by designated CQC inspectors. The applicant, which is probably you, is obliged to cover all costs like transportation costs, per diems, or man-day fees for the inspectors. What you can see on the left side is that the inspectors go like through a checklist. This is just an example here, an exemplified, to check like according to international quality, or it's like according to international management audits, like for example, if you fulfill the requirements, if the documentation available.
Hello, Martina. I think we might have lost you there. One of those great NASA moments. Are you there, Martina? All right, well, this might be a fantastic time for you guys to listening in.
Audit, including updating any documentation. Hello?
Yeah, I think we lost you there. I certainly lost you there for a couple of seconds. I'm not sure about the others, so I hope I wasn't.
Okay.
Hope I wasn't talking over everybody. Perhaps you might go back to when you were just describing the list on the left-hand side of that screen.
Okay, sorry, I didn't. Thanks for interrupting me. No, the point 4 on the right side, that the inspectors go through a checklist where you can see how to say an example on the left side in terms of requirements. For example, for the products and for the samples sent to the test lab, that there is documentation available and so on. So in cases where discrepancies are found, the manufacturer has 30 days to address any non-compliance issues. The factory will be assigned a factory ID number if the audit is successful. And for certain products, the factory number has to be placed under the CCC logo. So preparation for the audit, including updating any documentation, is strongly recommended. In particular, the Chinese auditors expect that the internal quality manuals, the CCC standards, are explicitly recognized, and that the Chinese testing rules for internal processes are noted. Next slide, please. So the factory inspection report, together with the sample test, is then submitted to here the certification body. We use the example of CQC for final review and evaluation, and on the basis of these both reports, the certification body will sign and approve the CCC certificate. Next slide, please. This is now slide 29, where you can see an example of a CCC certificate. The certificate is valid for 5 years, but might need to undergo an update if new standards are coming up. The next step in the process, so next slide please, is the CCC marking and labeling. So after the approval of the CCC certification, the product must be marked. This means that there are 4 designs basically for the CCC mark, depending on the type and the qualities of the product. Next slide, please. This is now slide 31, where you can see the 4 different types of CCC marks. So I already mentioned, here you can see the 4 different designs. All products mentioned in the official catalogue I've already introduced require certification. So due to the differences in the testing criteria, there are 4 different types of CCC marks. And here you see the following examples show the designated marks for safety, which is the upper one on the left side. The second one is the CCC for electromagnetic compatibility certification. On down you will find the CCC for safety and electromagnetic compatibility, or what a word. And the last one is the CCC for fire certification. Next slide, please. So this is now slide 32, sorry, because I cannot see the slides I'm talking about. So the CCC mark, what you have seen before, is always a combination of the mark itself and its safety category. The manufacturer is free to use the original authorized CCC stickers, which you can directly purchase from CNCA, or you may submit your own drawings for approval. If it is not appropriate to apply the CCC mark directly to the body of your product, it can be affixed, for example, to the product package. On slide 33 now, next slide please, you can see an example for certification of a mark permission. Yeah. So on the right side you see the dimensions of a mark and where it could be placed on the product. So this is the example certification mark permission. Next slide please. So the last step in the overall process is the annual follow-up factory inspection. So the follow-up inspection is normally carried out every 12 to 18 months and can be assigned to local testing bodies that cooperate with the CQC. The costs of follow-up inspections are therefore significantly lower than the initial inspections. They can be also done by national certification bodies. So CQC maintains the right to conduct, for example, unannounced inspections without prior notice, but this is rarely done in practice, and if it is done, it does not substitute the normal follow-up inspection. Follow-up inspections validate the manufacturer's quality assurance system, and the certified product continue to meet the requirements of the regulation. So you might ask yourself, how about cost of all of this, because it's quite a lengthy process. So next slide please. The CCC related cost, so the final cost receiving the CCC certificate will depend on the specific product in question. So basic costs can be divided into administrative costs and service fees. Administrative costs or administration fees represent a flat rate for the administrative service and are not that high in nature. They usually represent several hundred euros and are fixed through a central pricing policy. I already mentioned the more than 70 implementation rules, so the fees are fixed there as well. However, the test fee will depend on the complexity of the product and the nature of the test involved. In addition, you will be charged an approval and registration fee as well as an approval fee for being authorized to affix the actual CCC mark. The second big category of fees are the service fees. They include the fees for factory inspections, travel costs, and the per diems of the inspectors, where the applicant is responsible for. It is also recommended, probably for a first-time certification, to use a consultant, and depending on what those people are charging, this can also run up costs to several thousand euros. So to give you an idea, for example, a factory inspection, the man day of a factory inspection actually is about 2,500 RMB, which is with the current rate about 8.3, it's about 300 euros a day. I have talked a lot now about how to say which products are mandatory, but of course there are also exemptions to the rule. So next slide please, which is now slide 36. There are few exemptions for the mandatory CCC mark. In general, products not intended for sale or usage on the Chinese market can be exempted from testing requirements. Those exemptions include, for example, products used at exhibitions or for special purposes, but this includes also personal belongings or products imported for research and development or testing purposes. The second category of exemptions, next slide please. The second category are products and parts eligible for exemption. They need a special exempt approval. So there has to be an application that should be submitted to CNCA, one of the authorities I mentioned, with supporting documentation proving above conditions, that the above conditions are met, like to tell them, okay, this is for research and development or for testing purposes, or those are spare parts imported, for example, for assessment of a production line. So in terms of documentation requirements, there is always a formal application letter describing a couple of details, then a copy of the business license or a copy of declaration of compliance with appropriate safety standards and so on. So if you require such special exemption approval, you should apply for at least 1 month in advance, and it has to be noticed that the validity of the exemption certificate depends on the conditions of use. Next slide please. So some general remarks regarding customs. To pass customs, for example, especially for samples, special documentation is requested, and we find that this is very often underestimated. So please do not underestimate that step. There are special regulations on the certification of foreign samples. It is also important to note that once the CCC is obtained, products have to bear the mark on the product and or the packaging. Every product documentation, every documentation coming along with the product has to include all information related to the CCC certificate. Products not meeting the CCC requirements, which sometimes also happens, may be held at the border by Chinese customs and will be subject to penalties. Next slide, please. So getting into the Chinese market for the first time is quite complex and a very administrative process. However, don't be discouraged. Many European companies are successfully selling their products in China. The clear advantages of the CCC are that the China Compulsory Certification is the official license and enables to freely harness the huge potential of the Chinese market and import products into China without any problems at customs. So this means after a successful first-time certification, new products can be certified quickly and to reasonable costs. What is quite important is there is the CCC justifies, how to say, consumer recognition. So it provides your customers, you can provide your customers with CCC certified products and of course prevent and eliminate substandard products and processes. So our recommendation is investing time in making the first time successful is a good strategy to avoid redoing the administrative process and delay the time to market. Make sure to have an employee dedicated to the CCC project who can provide documentation or information whenever it is needed. Particularly during testing, the engineers might have questions. Thus, someone should support with translation and communication. We also have found that routine helps. So once you import, you have an import channel which proves to be working, stick to it. For first-time applicants, we recommend to spend time finding the right service provider and learn about the process for future occasions. Be selective when choosing your partner in China because it will be your connection with key government offices. So what we always recommend is due diligence, do a due diligence. This is due diligence here we mean to test or to check your partner. The EU SME Center here has developed a toolkit which has been already mentioned. And we also recommend that sometimes it may be useful not to entrust the whole CCC procedure, for example, to a distributor, because we had cases in the past where the distributor took all the required technical information and started to produce behind the back of the manufacturer. Last but not least, language. Language is one of the key factors for success. So in-house language capabilities are definitely an asset. Many people report that CCC problems suddenly arise after many years of hassle-free cross-border shipment, and then coming to us and asking how is this possible and how can I protect myself against these sudden changes. For those who have done business in China, there is no protection against those sudden changes. Here you are permanently vulnerable to unexpected changes in rules and to bilateral discrepancies. Rules can change, sometimes with only 3 months forewarning, though 12 months is the typical announcement time. Announcements are not made in English, which makes it more difficult for foreign companies to learn about these changes and to be prepared. But also custom officers can make mistakes and, for example, assume a particular product requires CCC even if it does not. So this also causes interruptions. This is where I'm ending now. In the next slide, you will find some useful links. So this is slide, let me see, 40 now. You find some useful links, for example, the CNCA CCC website. Unfortunately, I think it's in Chinese only. Yeah, thanks a lot for your attention. I hope you heard me because I couldn't see my own slides, so I was following my presentation. And I don't know, given the time, you understand me?
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly conquered some technological issues this morning. So
Okay.
thank you for coming through loud and clear. And what I would say is that as the questions came up, thank you for your incredibly thorough presentation. As questions came up at each slide, you rapidly answered them
Okay, I see.
before I
Okay.
even needed to ask them. A couple of common themes that came through. I know we want to wrap up soon. One of the themes of questions that came through was the timeline. Are you looking at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? Does it vary between product? Is there a waiting list to get the factory guys to come over and do your inspection? How does that work?
I mean, in terms of timeline, what service providers or what you can get usually as a number is 3 months from getting papers together and handing them in till you really can put your mark on the product. But this is a very optimist estimation. Usually it takes, at least 4 to 5 months, depending on how well the application is. And there is no average, because of course it depends on the product as well. We had cases between 6 and 9 months. It sometimes also depends on how fast, for example, the Chinese inspectors can get visas. This is even if you prepare all your application documentation and everything goes smoothly, sometimes just that those inspectors not getting their visas can be really an issue, which then extends the whole process for a couple of time, because of course those people need visas.
Yeah, and in the UK, the UK is outside of Schengen, so that can be even potentially a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
One other issue that came up in terms of these, you mentioned very quickly. A lot of SMEs, they might not have the resource to put one person on this, but you mentioned briefly that there are sort of intermediary organizations like service providers. Can you go and get some sort of consultant or somebody who can help you through this process? Is this costly? Would you recommend it? Are these guys? Do you have to find a Chinese consultant to do this, like in some other, AQ, SIQ labeling procedures and all of that, or is it, is there international consulting firms or that process?
Usually you find both. You find ones working in the different member states. Most of them have then offices, for example, here in China. It is essential that you work with somebody who has at least Chinese nationals who are able to track the process. It's good to have people here in China, of course. It's we know that not every SME, can afford to have somebody here, but then at least you should look for a service provider who has people here who understands the engineers, or at least then at home has somebody who speaks the language and can help. If not, then of course you would need a translator. This is one. In terms of service providers, we have worked here together with ones like Europeans who are here in China for quite a while and have already good relationships with engineers or with testing labs. There are, depending on the product, there are, full packages starting. It really depends on the product and the application and what has to be done and the number of products you want to get certified. Yeah, but I think it starts between 20,000–25,000 euros for the whole for one product for the whole thing. But then they really help you to get your product through everything, and they really help also in terms of translation to get all the application to talk and communicate with the test labs and the engineers and make the process smoothly. And of course, some of those people are really good. They help that you keep basically your trade secrets or your IPR, because what has been found out in a couple of cases is that during the process, because you basically are required to deliver all your technical information, yeah, which means you basically give everything away, yeah. There have been cases in the past where just this information disappeared, and then at the next corner somebody started its business exactly with with the product you intended to sell in China. Yeah.
Oh,
and
that's a particularly terrifying thought. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, it's getting better, of course. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that this is the everyday experience. Yeah, but this happens. So, if you team up with the consultant, I mean, what I said, it's you should see a reference list, for example, with whom he already has worked together, so that in case you can call people and ask, hey, what about this? Is this guy, would you recommend this guy? Yeah, and those people should be able to explain you the process in detail for your product, what I just explained on a very superficial and overviewy way. Yeah. And of course, I mean, there has to be somebody Chinese on board, because this is the essential, and to understand the whole process and product and the technical requirements of your product particularly, and is able to explain it to the test labs in case of questions. Yeah.
All right, terrific. One final one, and then we'll wrap it up from Kathy. Do they get the test products back regularly, or is there ever any issue with that?
Can you repeat? I didn't.
Yeah. Do they give the test products back regularly, or is there ever an issue with that?
Usually you get it back, but sometimes it's in thousands pieces. And I mean, we have had complaints in the past that people said, well, but it depends on what it is. I mean, sometimes company complains and you cannot use it anymore. Yeah, but usually you get them back.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you for that, Martina. Thank you very much for your really in-depth presentation today. That wraps up our session for this morning. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact the China Britain Business Council or the EU SME Centre. I think Martina would be happy to direct and support whatever questions you might have. All right, good. So let us just, before we wrap up this morning, the presentation and the recording, so will both be available on our website. You can find the presentations for this week, the recordings for this week on our YouTube page already. And if you go to the Opportunity to Action part of our cbbc.org website, you'll find also a PDF download if you missed anything today. What I would draw your attention to is the upcoming China Business Conference on the 14th of January in London. This is pretty much the key UK-China business event held in the UK. So whatever stage of China business you're at, I would certainly recommend checking this out and coming along. Other than that, I think it remains to say thank you again to Martina. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this was valuable for you. If you have any questions, please contact us. So I think this might be my first time to say Happy Christmas to everybody. Happy Christmas and have a great day. Thanks very much. Bye now.